We have time for one final question. It will come from this side.
Hi, Dr. Chomsky. I met you first with Daniel Berrigan. It's a long time ago. But anyway, getting back to your specific expertise in linguistics, it's been troublesome to me that the media will use words like socialism, class warfare, but we never hear fascism. And from my studies of ideology, state-supported capitalism, pretty much what we've been talking, or what you've been talking about, is fascism. I know words have power, and you know that too. Are we too shy to talk about what basically almost brought the end of mankind in the last century? Or is it just the media controls and you have to go to Link TV or Democracy Now, or I don't know. But they are not supported. They have to be supported by people donating to them. Isn't anyone aware?
Well, the history of that word is kind of interesting. Fascism obviously took on bad connotations in the 1940s. But if you go back, and incidentally the same is true of other words, like take propaganda. The term propaganda now is not used for information in English. It still is in other languages. If you go back to the 1920s, information was just called propaganda. Like Edward Bernays, who I mentioned, the founder of the public relations industry. The book of his, from which I was quoting on engineering of consent and controlling the masses and so on, is called propaganda. Propaganda is just what you do when you try to control beliefs and attitudes. Well, since the 1930s and the 40s, you can't use that term anymore for its obvious connotations. Fascism is a very interesting one, and we can learn a lot about ourselves from looking at its history. Before the Second World War, before the United States got into the Second World War, 1941, fascism was not regarded particularly critically. In fact, there's a very important book I'd urge you to read if you haven't, called Business as a System of Power, by one of the great political economists, Robert Brady, Veblenite economist. It's about the spread of fascism through the industrial world. He points out that in every country, all of the industrial countries, there are developments of basically fascist character, and he discusses them, and it's perfectly understandable. He was quite right, in fact. There's nothing inherent in fascism that says you have to have gas chambers. That's a special thing that developed. And in fact, say, Mussolini's fascism was very highly regarded in the United States. Remember, that's pre-Nazi. FDR, President Roosevelt, he described Mussolini as that admirable Italian gentleman. I mean, as late as 1939, he was praising Mussolini, saying, well, he's been kind of misled by Hitler, but basically doing the right thing. When fascism was instituted in Italy, and it was pretty ugly, it was praised across the board in the United States. Business investment shot up. It also did after Hitler came in. There was a Fortune magazine, the main business journal, had an issue in, I think, 1932. The title, you look at the front page cover, big letters, it says, "The WAPs are unwhopping themselves," meaning the WAPs are finally doing something right. You know, they got a fascist government which works, and we like that. People on the left were praising it. Same with Nazism. I mean, as late as 1938, Roosevelt's main advisor, Sumner Welles, went to the Munich conference. That's the conference which tore up Czechoslovakia. And he came back full of praise for the Nazi moderates who are going to help us usher in a new era of peace. They're the moderates kind of protecting civilized values from the extremists of the right and left and so on. I mean, George Kennan, who's very much honored and respected now, there's a major biography that just came out full of praise. If you take a look at his actual record, he was the American consul in Berlin right through 1941. He was withdrawn, Pearl Harbor, and he was sending back diplomatic correspondence to Washington saying, you shouldn't be so hard on the Nazis. They're doing some things wrong, but basically we can do business with them. They're the right kind of people. Well, a couple of years later, you couldn't talk about fascism that way. Fascism meant crematoria, gas chambers, and so on. So you stop using the word. But your point is correct. As a social and political order, Robert Brady knew what he was talking about. There are elements of this kind of state capitalist order all over the industrial world, taking different forms.
Well, thank you all for all of your questions and for your attention.